She said it at a donor reception, under white lights, with cameras nearby. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough to land. She said maybe I only wanted her for her body. The words didn't come with anger. They came with a smile, like a test she already thought she'd passed. People around us kept talking about shipping delays and foundation metrics. Glasses clinked. A photographer asked us to turn slightly toward the logo wall. I didn't react. That was the first break in the pattern. For years, I'd been the one smoothing edges. Director of risk. The man who rewrote sentences before they became problems. Who stepped in before questions turned dangerous. Who made sure nothing leaked, nothing escalated, nothing embarrassed the people standing next to me. That night, I stayed still. She adjusted her posture, waiting for correction, for reassurance, for the familiar move where I pulled the narrative back into place. I didn't. I watched a junior contractor from one of our vendors drift too close to her circle. Too casual, too visible, married, reckless, and dependent on contracts he didn't fully understand. I noticed how she didn't step away. A board member glanced at me, eyebrows raised, silently asking if this was handled. I gave him nothing. Not a nod. Not a look. The question floated, unanswered. Later, she said I felt distant. Cold. Like I'd shut something off. I hadn't shut anything off. I had simply stopped protecting the space around her. The first confirmation didn't come from her. It never does. It came from an internal report I wasn't supposed to read anymore. A vendor compliance flag routed through an old channel I'd once built. I recognized the name immediately. The junior manager from the contractor firm. Small role. Weak controls. Personal expenses blurring into corporate reimbursements. The kind of man who didn't survive scrutiny. The kind of man she shouldn't have been anywhere near. I didn't confront her. I didn't check her phone. I didn't ask questions designed to corner a confession. I kept doing what I'd always done on the surface. Same schedule. Same calm. Same silence at dinner. What changed was what I stopped correcting. A colleague mentioned hearing rumors about a contractor being unusually close to our foundation events. Normally, I'd shut that down in one sentence. That night, I let the comment hang. The room shifted slightly, like a structure reacting to a missing support beam. At home, she talked about feeling misunderstood. About being seen as a face, not a mind. About wanting to feel chosen for more than appearances. She spoke like someone building a justification in real time. I listened without interruption. She didn't notice that I'd stopped filling the gaps. That I wasn't aligning her words with a safer interpretation. That I wasn't filtering risk out of her sentences. Later, I saw a message preview light up on her phone. No name. Just a fragment. Enough to confirm direction, not detail. That was enough. I didn't feel anger. I felt alignment. The system was revealing stress fractures on its own. And for the first time, I let it. The evidence didn't arrive as a shock. It arrived as a pattern. Expense adjustments started appearing in places no one but me would notice. Small reallocations tied to foundation events she oversaw. Nothing illegal on its face. Just sloppy enough to suggest someone thought proximity meant protection. I stopped cleaning it up. Her calendar changed. More site visits. More overlapping appearances where that contractor's firm somehow always had representation. He began showing up where he had no operational reason to be. Too visible for someone in his position. I watched without reacting. At a charity planning meeting, a sponsor asked a question that normally would have died before finishing the sentence. Something about vendor boundaries. About optics. Everyone glanced at me, waiting for the familiar redirect. I didn't move. The pause stretched. She answered instead. Her voice stayed steady, but the room shifted. Doubt doesn't need volume. It just needs space. At home, she became sharper. Less patient. She accused me of being emotionally absent. Of pulling away physically, like distance itself was an accusation. She said I was cold now. That I looked at her like she was a problem to be managed. I didn't deny it. Later that night, she fell asleep with her phone face down. A notification lit the edge of the screen. A name I already knew. A timestamp that didn't belong to business hours. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need proof of intimacy. I already had proof of miscalculation. She thought the risk was personal. The risk was public, and I was no longer absorbing it for her. The shift became visible when I stopped showing up in the places where my presence had always stabilized things. I still attended events. I still stood beside her when required. But I arrived late, left early, and stopped hovering at the edges of conversations like a silent perimeter. When people tested boundaries with questions that edged toward risk, I didn't intercept them. At one closed-door reception, a regional partner hesitated before renewing a verbal commitment. He looked at me, waiting for reassurance. I met his eyes and said nothing. The silence lasted just long enough to register. He nodded slowly, unsettled. On the drive home, she asked if something was wrong. Not angrily, carefully, like someone sensing a drop in pressure. I told her I was busy. It wasn't a lie. I'd reallocated my attention. I stopped pre-reading her talking points. Stopped flagging names she shouldn't be seen with. Stopped calling ahead to smooth logistics that protected her image without her ever knowing. The system I'd built around her didn't collapse. It simply powered down. She started compensating, talking more, touching my arm in public, laughing louder at dinners. The contractor appeared more frequently, too close, too familiar. People noticed. I could see it in the way conversations shortened when she approached. One afternoon, a foundation board update went out with her name misspelled in the subject line. Normally, I'd correct it before it circulated. I let it go. She noticed that evening. She asked why I hadn't fixed it. I told her I hadn't seen it. That was when the panic started. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tightness behind her eyes. For the first time, she was standing in unfiltered reality, and I was no longer between her and the fall. The contractor didn't last long once the pressure stopped being absorbed. A routine audit request went unanswered, then delayed, then answered incorrectly. Nothing dramatic, just enough missteps to draw attention from people who had never needed to look before. His firm started losing meetings. Invitations dried up. Calls went unreturned. I didn't make a single move. I didn't forward a document. I didn't flag a concern. I didn't warn anyone to be careful. I simply stayed out of the way while gravity did its work. She noticed before he did. Her phone calls became shorter. Her posture tightened at events. She asked questions that sounded casual but landed sharp, like she was checking for exits. She started asking me what I thought more often, as if my silence was something she could still reverse if she caught it early enough. I gave her nothing. At a fundraising dinner, the contractor was seated 3 tables away instead of at our circle. He kept looking over, trying to catch her eye. She didn't look back. The distance was already becoming dangerous. A donor leaned toward me and asked, quietly, if everything was stable with the foundation's partnerships. It was the kind of question I used to neutralize instantly. I told him I had no concerns to share. That was true. They were no longer my concerns. Later that night, she said she felt exposed, like people were watching her differently. She asked if I could feel it too. I said I hadn't noticed. That was the moment she understood something essential had changed. Not between her and the world. Between her and me. The social shift didn't announce itself. It showed up in small absences. Her name stopped appearing automatically on guest lists. It wasn't removed. It was just pending. Follow-ups went unanswered. Calendar holds expired without confirmation. The kind of quiet hesitation that signals a reputation entering review. At a private reception, someone asked her how the foundation was navigating vendor optics. The question was phrased politely, but the room went still. All eyes moved to me out of habit. I stayed focused on my glass. She answered on her own. The words were fine. The delivery was fine. What wasn't there was the reinforcement. The subtle alignment that told the room this conversation was contained. After that, people began drifting away from her in increments. Not avoidance. Recalibration. She noticed. She started asking me to attend more meetings with her again. To just be there. To sit closer. To look engaged. She framed it as partnership. I told her my schedule was tight. At a charity committee call, a longtime supporter paused mid-sentence and asked if the foundation's governance had changed. It was the kind of moment where one sentence from me would have sealed confidence. I let the pause breathe. The supporter nodded slowly and moved on, but something had already been written off. That night, she told me people were being strange, that she felt like the ground was shifting and she didn't know why. She said I felt far away, like I was watching instead of standing with her. She wasn't wrong. I was watching. For years, I'd been the structure that made her world feel solid. Now she was learning what it felt like without reinforcement. And the silence was starting to speak louder than I ever had. Isolation doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates. She started coming home earlier, as if proximity might restore balance. She asked questions that circled the same point without touching it. Whether I was tired, whether something at work was pulling me away, whether she'd done something wrong. I answered calmly, briefly, never defensively. The contractor stopped appearing altogether. His name vanished from updates. When she asked what had happened to his firm, I said I hadn't followed it. That was true. The system didn't need my attention anymore. What she lost next was quieter. A longtime friend postponed lunch twice, then stopped responding. A board member she used to text casually switched to formal emails. At events, people greeted her warmly and moved on faster than before. She started watching me in public, checking my face when conversations shifted, waiting for me to step in. I never did. At home, she accused me of withholding, of being emotionally unavailable. She said it felt like I was punishing her without saying why. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. She said I used to protect her, that I used to believe in her. I told her I still believed she could handle her own world. That was the sentence that broke something. After that, she stopped accusing and started adjusting. Softer voice, more careful timing. She touched my arm the way she used to when she needed alignment. I didn't pull away. I just didn't lean in. She was learning what it meant to stand without a buffer, without someone quietly absorbing consequence. And for the first time, she was truly alone, even when I was right there. The confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic place. No raised voices. No doors slammed. It happened in the kitchen, late, when there was nothing left to distract her. She stood across from me and finally said what she'd been circling for weeks. She said I felt cold, that I was still there but unreachable, that it was like living with someone who had already left. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her framing. She asked if I still wanted her. Not physically. She said that part like it didn't matter. She asked if I still saw her as worth choosing. I didn't answer right away. That pause did more damage than any accusation could have. She filled the silence herself. She talked about feeling reduced, about trying to prove she was more than an image, more than a role. She said she made a mistake, not naming it directly, just enough to test whether I would catch her if she slipped. I didn't reach. I told her I hadn't changed how I treated her. I told her I'd simply stopped intervening in things that weren't mine to manage. She said that wasn't fair. That marriage meant protection. I told her partnership wasn't the same as insulation. She went quiet after that. Not angry. Unsteady. She realized this wasn't a fight she could win by explaining, or apologizing, or reframing. I wasn't withdrawing love. I was withdrawing cover. And she could feel the difference now. The collapse didn't look like scandal. There were no headlines. No public accusations. It looked like doors closing quietly. Her foundation lost a keynote slot at a conference she'd anchored for years. The explanation was polite and thin. Scheduling issues. Strategic shift. She read the email twice, then looked at me like I might translate what it really meant. I didn't. A week later, a sponsor delayed a renewal. Not canceled. Delayed. The kind of delay that signals doubt without committing to it. She started waking up earlier, checking her phone before she spoke, scanning for reassurance that didn't come. People she used to call for perspective stopped answering quickly. When they did, they were careful, neutral, professional, no warmth. She asked me if I could make a call. Just one. She said it would help steady things. I told her I wasn't the right person anymore. That was when the weight finally hit her. Not the affair, not the risk she took. The realization that the stability she'd relied on hadn't been automatic. It had been maintained. She moved through the house like a guest. Quieter, slower, watching me as if proximity might trigger restoration. I didn't change my routine. I didn't withdraw physically. I just lived without adjusting for her outcomes. One evening, she said she finally understood what cold meant. She said it wasn't cruelty. It was exposure. She was right. Her world wasn't collapsing because of what she did. It was collapsing because I stopped preventing consequences she'd never learned to feel. And now she was standing in the open, without cover, without certainty, without me between her and reality. The final moment didn't come with a decision announced out loud. It arrived as clarity. She sat across from me one evening, no phone in her hands this time, no agenda layered under the conversation. Her voice was steady, but stripped of strategy. She said she finally understood what she'd accused me of that night at the reception. She said she confused safety with desire, protection with control. She said she thought being wanted for her body was a threat, until she learned what it meant to be seen without anything guarding her. I listened. She said she felt exposed everywhere now. At work, in rooms she used to own. She said the cold wasn't coming from me. It was coming from standing in a world that no longer been around her. I didn't step closer. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I told her I was still exactly where I'd always been. The difference was that I no longer adjusted myself to soften outcomes that weren't mine to manage. She asked if that meant I was leaving. I stood, picked up my jacket, and looked at her the same way I'd learned to look at risk reports when emotion had no place in the outcome. I told her I would no longer show up where I wasn't respected, protected, or considered. Not as a shield, not as a system, just as a man choosing where he stood. I walked out without anger, without urgency. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. For the first time, so did the world she'd built. And this time, there was no one left to intercept the silence.